If I Should Die Before I Wake, Chapter 2, Hillary and Shauna. When I stopped spinning, I found myself walking through a sunny fall day, on a street I had never seen, in a land where I had never been, with a best friend I had never known. I was wearing a colorless wool jumper over a white blouse and itchy wool tights that sagged at my ankles. Still, I was pleased with what I was wearing. The tights were new, and my best friend looked much the same as I. We even wore the same coat, with the same star decorations, canary yellow stars, the one on the front and one on the back. We were on our way to school, laughing and talking in a language I did not know, yet I understood. As we approached the next street, we stopped laughing. I felt my shoulders stiffen and my throat go dry as I took hold of my friend's hand, and we timidly set foot down the street. There were other children on the road, laughing and pushing at each other as we had done earlier. They weren't afraid. And I suddenly knew that it had something to do with our stars. I knew, too, that we were taking a great chance going to school. And as we walked, we scanned the streets left and right. I did not know what we were searching for until they were in front of me. 2 men in uniforms with guns in their hands. Without thinking, both of us hopped off the sidewalk. That was a rule. When these men in their uniforms were on the sidewalk, we had to get off, or they'd shoot us. We expected them to turn us away, saying we were no longer allowed to attend school with the other students. Instead, they led us to a building that on the outside smelled like manure and on the inside like disinfectant. There were several women there like us, with yellow stars stitched to their clothing. They were down on their knees with guards behind them, and the guards were laughing, mocking them while they scrubbed the floors, some with their hands and some with a kind of cloth. One of the men shouted at us. The shout was so loud, and it frightened me so, I didn't hear what he said. He slapped me in the face. "Tights off!" he repeated in a language that so repulsed me to hear I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I knew he'd only slap me again, or worse. I kicked off my shoes and tried to scramble out of my tights, but it wasn't fast enough for the guard and kicked me in the back. It wasn't hard, and it didn't hurt, but my feet were still in the tights. I lost my balance and fell onto the floor and into the disinfectant. The men behind me laughed, but no one scrubbing the floor laughed or even looked up. "She's just a young girl," I heard someone say, someone down there on the floor close to me. I wiped the wet slop off my coat and stood up. The others kept scrubbing. I was led away from my friend, down the hall to the other end, where a woman was scrubbing the stairs. "You work with her, clumsy Jew," the officer spit. "Use those to scrub." He pointed to my tights. I dropped to my knees and dunked my tights into the bucket beside me. I didn't look up, and I didn't speak to the woman who worked on the stairs with me. I just dunked and scrubbed, dunked and scrubbed. It must have been a half hour before I took a chance and looked around. It was then that I noticed that the woman beside me was my neighbor and my mother's best friend, Etra Hurwitz. I wanted to sing with joy when I saw her. I inched over closer to her, and as we scrubbed, we knocked elbows. I saw her smile, but she didn't look up. Still, I knew she knew it was I who was beside her, and the occasional knocking of our elbows gave us both the courage, a reminder that we weren't alone. I watched the circular movements of her hands and tried to copy the rhythm. Her movements were even and strong like her hands, used to hard labor, but not to such humiliation. She dunked her rag into the bucket, wrung it out, and spread it back on the stairs. It was then that I saw for the first time what she had in her hand, what so many of the other women had in their hands, her own underpants. I wanted to cry out, to weep for these women. I wanted to kill the men, the officers who were doing this to us. I scrubbed harder, faster, trying not to think about it, trying not to cry. I wanted to be strong, like Etra, like my own mother, both of them so brave, so strong. Yes, I had to be like my mother. My mother? Was she here? Please, dear God, not my mother. I could not bear it. I inched closer to my mother's best friend and asked in a voice so low that even I could hardly hear it. My mother. Here? Miss Hurwitz kept scrubbing, and I wasn't sure she heard. I was about to repeat my question when I saw her nod. A sound slipped through my lips before I could catch myself. Within seconds, I had an officer behind me, the barrel of his gun thrust against my shoulder. I kept scrubbing, acting as if it wasn't there. What did I care if I was shot? It would be better than seeing my mother, so beautiful, so proud, at the feet of these men, scrubbing the floors with her underpants. Let them shoot me, I thought. He stood like that for only a minute, and then left, swearing at me, the clumsy Jew, as he walked away. The sound of his voice made me sick. The sound of his shiny black boots reminded me of the victorious march down the center of our streets not long ago. Made me want to spit in his face. Oh, if I could only spit in his face. I felt tears running down my own face, and I let them drop onto the stairs. I rubbed them in, hard as I could. Then I decided no, I would not wash these steps with my tears, but with my spit, my contempt. And so together the rest of that morning and into the afternoon, with each chuck of our bucket, Etra and I spit at the men with the guns and shiny black boots. Finally, late in the afternoon, they allowed us to leave. My legs could hardly straighten as I pulled myself up, using the banister for support. My knees looked like two red doorknobs, round and swollen. Miss Hurwitz was even worse, and I had to help her as she hobbled down the stairs. I led her out into the wonderful fresh air, and the two of us just stood and inhaled. Even manure smelled good after breathing cleaning fumes all day. The other women had already left. And so together, Miss Hurwitz and I set off, eager to rejoin our families. We had been walking for a quarter of an hour when we saw a bit of commotion farther down the street. Come on, Miss Hurwitz tugged at my coat sleeve. I know another way. I was just about to follow her when two officers shifted their position, and I glimpsed between them, dangling from a tree by his coat, my father. No! I shouted, and I ran down the sidewalk, forgetting the sidewalk rule. 3 officers turned and aimed their guns at me. I heard my father shout, "Go home, Shauna!" I ignored him. How dare these beasts do this to him? Did they know who he was? That's my father, let him go. I pointed at him and demanded again, let him go. The men began to laugh. It was such a big joke. Then they turned and aimed their guns at my father. No! I shouted again, speaking to them in their own language. Why are you doing this? One man spoke without looking at me, without taking his eyes off my father. My dear, dear Tata. Your lazy, filthy father refuses to work. He's too tired, he says. He needs to rest, he says. And so he leans against this tree. Ha! He needs this tree to hold him up, you see. We've helped him. Now he can rest. The blood was rushing to my head so fast I thought I might explode. How dare they treat my father like this? And how dare all these people, for I had suddenly noticed that there were many neighbors of ours, how dare they stand there watching and laughing, no one bothering to help? I moved closer, ignoring my father as he tried to shoo me away with his hands. My father is ill, I said. He has a heart condition. Please let him down. I'll do his work for him. What is it you want him to do? This, too, was funny to these men. But one of them led me behind a long building to another street. There were many men already there, all friends of my father's, shoveling dirt and heaping it up into a pile against the building. The officer pointed his gun at my father's shovel. You work, he said. And don't rest, or you too will hang in the tree. I grabbed the shovel and began my work with my gusto. Following behind a young boy about my age, I scooped up the dirt and pitched it against the building. I tried to ignore the jeering on my other side. I would work until the job was done, when Tata and I could leave, and he and I would never speak of this day to anyone ever. My pile of dirt was rising clear up to the level of the first window, and yet I wasn't tired. Tata, he would be proud of me. I smiled to myself and then caught a glimpse of someone, a girl, staring back at me through the window. She had a face like mine, only older, wiser looking, especially the eyes. They were dark and deep set and looked at me as if they knew everything about me, about the world. I could see pain in those eyes. They were trying to tell me something. I stopped shoveling only for a second, only to understand. Then I heard 2 shots explode on the other side of the building. "Tata!" I cried. I dropped the shovel and fell into the dirt pile screaming, knowing somehow from that day forward I'd be screaming forever.